somewhere in the winter of 1945. The exact room doesn't matter. The exact day doesn't matter. A British or American officer sits across a table from a German field marshal. The man is 69 years old, tall, erect, deeply lined. His name is Gerd von Rundstedt, and he has spent 50 years in uniform as a soldier of the old Prussian school. Formal, sardonic, privately contemptuous of the regime he served and the fantasies it demanded of him. The war is over, or very nearly. He has been captured. He has been tried. He is answering questions. The officer asks which American commander impressed him most. Von Rundstedt considers it. Then he answers. 3 words. Patton was your best. That is where this story ends. But the question is where it begins, and what this old Prussian soldier had to watch happen in order to arrive at that verdict. What von Rundstedt saw in the winter of 1944 was not simply a battle. It was a catastrophe his own side had predicted, launched anyway, and then been unable to stop. The man who named Patton the finest Allied commander of the war watched Patton's achievement from inside the wreckage it caused. That is not a compliment from a gracious loser. It is a professional verdict from a man who had no reason left to be generous. To understand what he saw, we have to go back 6 months before the battle began. By the autumn of 1944, the Third Reich is bleeding from every direction. The Normandy breakout has pushed the Wehrmacht back to the borders of Germany. Allied forces stand in Belgium, in Luxembourg, Meuse on the edge of the Siegfried Line. In the east, the Soviet steamroller has consumed entire army groups. The generals know what this means. They have known for years. And yet Adolf Hitler has a plan. The plan is called Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine, a code name designed to suggest defense while concealing something far more ambitious. 25 divisions, 250,000 soldiers, 1,000 tanks. A surprise attack through the Ardennes forest in Belgium and Luxembourg, aimed at crossing the Meuse River, seizing the port of Antwerp, and splitting the Allied armies in 2. The goal is to drive a wedge between the British and American forces, severe enough to compel a negotiated peace in the West, leaving Germany free to concentrate everything against the Soviets. The plan has, in its own terms, a certain coherence. It is also, and in the private judgment of every senior German commander assigned to execute it, a fantasy. Nominal command of the Western Front belongs to von Rundstedt. He listens to the plan. He recognizes some merit in the operational concept. And then, in private, he renders his verdict. All conditions for the possible success of such an offensive, he says, are lacking. All, absolutely all. He captures the situation in a single dark line. If we reach the Meuse, he tells his staff, we should get down on our knees and thank God, let alone trying to reach Antwerp. He will comply with the order. He will echo Hitler's words in public, but he will not believe it. Below him sits Field Marshal Walter Model, commander of Army Group B, the formation that will actually conduct the offensive. Model is 53, short and hard-faced, invariably wearing a monocle. His compressed, forward-leaning energy has earned him the nickname Hitler's Fireman for his ability to stabilize collapsing situations on the Eastern Front. He is, of all the senior German commanders, the one Hitler actually trusts. And even he, in a private conversation 13 days before the attack, tells a subordinate that the plan has less than a 10% chance of success. He launches the offensive anyway. And then there is Hasso von Manteuffel. He is 47 years old, small and wiry, known to his troops by the affectionate nickname, Our Little One. He wears the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, swords and diamonds at his collar. One of only 27 men in the entire Wehrmacht to hold that decoration. He commands the 5th Panzer Army, now the formation that will strike through the center of the Ardennes. Of the German plan, he will later say simply, it seemed to him foolish in many ways. He presses Hitler for one concession. No opening artillery bombardment, which he argues is a concept left over from the last war, one that will only destroy the element of surprise. He gets his concession. He gets nothing else. These three men, von Rundstedt, Model, Manteuffel, are among the most accomplished professional soldiers of their generation. They have led armies in France, in North Africa, across the steppes of Russia. They know how to read a battlefield. They read this one without illusion, a road network in the Ardennes barely capable of supporting the armored thrust being demanded of it. A supply system that will begin failing within days. It's an objective that requires a rate of advance the Wehrmacht of 1944 cannot sustain. They say so. They are ignored. One more detail worth noting before the attack begins. Manteuffel's 5th Panzer Army has not come to this assignment fresh. For several weeks before the Ardennes, his forces have been engaged in brutal fighting in Lorraine against the U.S. Third Army, commanded by Lieutenant General George S. Patton. Manteuffel already knows what Patton's army looks like from the inside of a fight with it. He has suffered it. When the order comes to pull out of Lorraine and refit for the Ardennes, Manteuffel withdraws knowing exactly who is behind him. That knowledge will matter, sooner than he expects. The German attack begins at 5:30 in the morning on December 16, 1944. 25 divisions crash through a thinly held American line across an 80-mile front. The surprise is complete. American intelligence had considered the Ardennes too difficult for a large-scale attack. Within hours, entire battalions are cut off or retreating in disorder. Within 2 days, a 50-mile gap has opened in the Allied front. At the center of everything is a small Belgian crossroads town called Bastogne. 7 major roads converge on Bastogne. All 7. For German armor trying to reach the Meuse, the town is not merely useful. It is necessary. Without it, the entire advance moves on a compressed, exposed axis that defending forces can press from both sides. The Germans need Bastogne. They need it quickly. On December 17th, Eisenhower orders the 101st Airborne Division to move without delay. Some the men load into open trucks and drive more than 100 miles through freezing weather. They arrive 4 hours before German forces close the ring. 4 hours. The 101st's commander, Major General Maxwell Taylor, is in Washington. His deputy, Brigadier General Gerald Higgins, is in England. The man who ends up commanding the defense of Bastogne is the divisional artillery officer, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, a man who had not planned to be here, making these decisions in this cold. By December 22nd, the encirclement is complete. Low cloud and ground fog lock the Ardennes tight. No Allied aircraft can fly. Artillery ammunition has been rationed to 10 rounds per gun per day. The wounded lie in a converted Belgian garage that serves as the aid station, and the temperature drops below freezing and stays there. So into this situation, on the morning of December the 22nd, arrives a German flag of truce. General Heinrich von Luttwitz, commanding the 47th Panzer Corps besieging Bastogne, sends a note to McAuliffe. The language is formal and deliberate. The fortune of war is changing, the note reads. Battalions are ready to annihilate the USA troops in and near Bastogne. The defenders have 2 hours to surrender. If they refuse, the consequences for the civilian population will fall on American heads. McAuliffe reads it, sets it down, thinks about it. One word: nuts. The German officers carrying the reply back to von Luttwitz do not initially understand it. When the meaning is explained, von Luttwitz reports upward to Manteuffel. And Manteuffel, who has already watched his timetable collapse, who has watched his armor bypass Bastogne and advance with an exposed southern flank, is furious. He orders the town bombed. On Christmas Eve, German bombers appear over Bastogne and reduce much of it to rubble. The Americans stay. What McAuliffe's answer told the German command was something they had not been willing to believe. These men were not going to break. not under bombardment, not under cold, not under hunger. Mounteuffel bombed the town because he had no better option. That was the information. The defiant reply became famous. What followed became legend. A crisis meeting, a promise of 48 hours, an army pivoting north through a winter storm, relief arriving at the last moment. History compressed it into something clean and slightly wrong. The reality is different. It is also more remarkable. And on November 25th, 3 weeks before the German attack, Patton writes in his diary, "First Army is making a terrible mistake leaving the 8th Corps static. It is highly probable that the Germans are building up east of them." 3 weeks before December 16th. Every intelligence officer reading the same front is reading exhausted German formations incapable of offensive action. Patton reads a threat taking shape. He says so in writing. Nobody acts on it. What Patton does next is what separates preparation from reaction. On December 18th, 2 days after the German attack begins, 1 day before the meeting that will determine the Allied response, he assembles his staff and tells them to begin drawing up contingency plans, not one plan. 3. The first, codenamed Cent, calls for an attack through Diekirch. The second, Dime, targets the tip of the Bulge. The third, Nickel, calls for an attack from Ardennes, north through Luxembourg, directly to Bastogne. He writes the 3 code words on a piece of paper and hands it to his chief of staff, Lieutenant General Hap Gay. When Patton knows what Eisenhower needs, he will call Gay with a single word. The army will begin moving within the hour. This is what happens at Verdun on December 19th. The meeting takes place in a cold, bare barracks room, maps on the tables, generals standing in their overcoats. Eisenhower, Bradley, Devers, Patton, Air Chief Marshal Arthur Tidder. Eisenhower announces that the present situation is to be regarded as an opportunity, not a disaster, and that there will be only cheerful faces at his conference table. Patton replies that if Eisenhower wants cheerful faces, then they should let the Germans go all the way to Paris and then cut them off. It gets a laugh. The meeting moves on. Then Eisenhower turns to Patton. How long to disengage the Third Army from its current operations, pivot northward, and attack toward Bastogne? 48 hours. The silence that follows is its own kind of document. Omar Bradley manages. Well, I'd give myself some leeway if I were you. An entire army, still in contact with the enemy, turning 90 degrees in 48 hours, in the worst winter in a generation, and attacking through the Ardennes. In that bare room at Verdun, it sounds like the kind of promise that erodes credibility as it is made. What the men in that room do not know is that Patton is not describing something he has just thought of. He is describing something he has already built. And the plans exist. The staff work is done. The orders, in their broad form, are already drafted. He is not promising what he will do. He is delivering what he has already done. He leaves the meeting at 9:15 in the morning and calls Gay at headquarters. Play ball. What follows is the largest and fastest 90-degree pivot of an entire army in the history of the war. 133,178 vehicles, turning north through winter slush, down roads clogged with retreating American units moving in the opposite direction. Below freezing, bridges blown, visibility near zero. Patton's lead elements are still 150 miles south of Bastogne when they begin moving. He promised 48 hours. His forces begin attacking on the morning of December the 22nd, 72 hours after Verdun. Should the relief itself will take 7 more days of grinding fighting through the frozen Ardennes. This is what the promise actually delivered. Not a 48-hour rescue, but an attack begun in 72 hours and sustained for 7 days over blown bridges and icy roads against an enemy that knew what was coming and still could not stop it. On December 22nd, at 6:30 in the morning, Patton launches 2 columns northward into the German flank. A snowstorm is still blowing. His army smashes 7 miles through the German line on the first day. Bastogne is still surrounded. But something has changed on the map Manteuffel is reading. The exposed southern flank, the vulnerability his commanders had flagged before a single shot was fired, is beginning to give. On December 23rd, the Russian high-pressure system pushes the cloud and fog out of the Ardennes. The sky opens. Allied aircraft appear over the battle for the first time since the offensive began. Transport planes drop supplies into Bastogne through the clear air. The soldiers on the ground watch the planes come in. On the evening of December 24th, Manteuffel picks up a telephone. He calls Hitler's military adjutant. He recommends a complete halt to all offensive operations and withdrawal to the West Wall. Bastogne has not fallen. Patton has not broken through. German bombers have been pounding the town for days. On paper, the battle is still ongoing, the besieging force still in position. But Manteuffel has looked at the southern flank, has looked at the fuel situation, has looked at the rate of Patton's advance. Patton, not whose army he knows from Lorraine, and reached the conclusion he was always going to reach. He says it out loud, through official channels. On Christmas Eve, Hitler refuses. The next day, Christmas Day, 1944, Germany mounts the heaviest assault on Bastogne it has yet attempted. German armor penetrates the defensive ring. Tanks push into the village of Hemrul. A tank commander radios that his panzers are inside Bastogne. They are knocked out by American gunners before they can exploit the breach. The assault fails. Manteuffel had told Hitler it was over. Hitler sent the tanks in anyway, and still, on frozen roads, in the short, dark days of a Belgian December, Patton's Third Army is grinding north. The order comes down on December 26th in the mid-afternoon. Push on to checkpoint 44 all night, on foot if necessary. And a radio operator from another unit asks for confirmation. 7 minutes pass. The reply comes back unchanged. The Sherman Tank Cobra King from Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams' 37th Tank Battalion of the 4th Armored Division grinds down the road from Assenoir in the failing winter light. December afternoons end early this far north. Ahead, soldiers from the 326th Engineers are holding a position on the edge of what used to be the German ring. At 4:50 in the afternoon, the Cobra King makes contact. The encirclement of Bastogne is broken. A corridor, narrow, contested, still under fire, exists where a ring was. Ground supply lines reopen the following day. The 101st Airborne would later insist, with the pride of men who had endured something harrowing, that they had things under control and did not need relief. 10 rounds per gun per day and a bombed-out garage full of wounded men say otherwise. But the insistence itself says something worth keeping. These men had held when the arithmetic was against them, and they were not inclined to accept a framing that diminished it. Both things are true at once. Abrams, who commanded the battalion that broke through on December 26th, would later command all United States forces in Vietnam. The tank that carries the American Army's name today carries his. On December 26, 1944, none of that was visible from inside the Cobra King's hull. Patton wrote to his wife Beatrice in the days that followed. The relief of Bastogne is the most brilliant operation we have thus far performed. Now the enemy must dance to our tune, not we to his. And in his diary, the speed of our movements is amazing even to me. It must constantly surprise the Germans. What remained of the German High Command's analysis, once the battle had run its course, was not surprise. It was confirmation. The men who had predicted the failure of Wacht am Rhein watched it fail in almost exactly the ways they had described. The road network strangled the advance. The fuel ran out. Bastogne held. And then Patton, the one Allied commander Manteuffel had already faced in Lorraine, whose methods he knew firsthand, arrived from the south and tore the flank open. Germany lost 120,000 men in the Ardennes. More than the numbers, The loss was inexperienced officers, elite formations, and armor and fuel the Eastern Front could not spare. The Soviet Vistula-Oder offensive opened in January 1945, and the Wehrmacht facing it had been stripped to feed Hitler's last gamble in the West. Field Marshal Walter Model had given the offensive less than a 10% chance of success. He fought it with everything he had. In April 1945, with the Reich collapsing on all sides, Model walked into a forest near Duisburg and shot himself rather than surrender. Von Rundstedt was captured by American forces in May 1945, tried for war crimes, and eventually released due to ill health. He died in 1953 in Bavaria, his name permanently attached to an offensive he had fought to prevent. He was reportedly still miffed about that when he died. And then there is Manteuffel. On March 2, 1945, General Hasso von Manteuffel is ordered to report to Adolf Hitler as he transfers from command of the 5th Panzer Army, the army that besieged Bastogne, whose flank Patton destroyed, whose Christmas Eve recommendation Hitler refused to hear. He enters the audience room and finds Hitler mid-tirade. All generals are liars. Nobody in the room is contradicting him. Manteuffel contradicts him. "I beg you to tell me," he says, small, wiry, standing before the man responsible for Lorraine and the Ardennes and everything that followed. When General Manteuffel, or any of his subordinate generals, has ever lied to you. Hitler, surrounded by men who have spent years agreeing with him, is taken aback. The moment contains the whole German officer corps within it. The men who had told Hitler the Ardennes offensive was doomed, who had written their objections in official memoranda, spoken them in private briefings, then launched the attack anyway, who had watched it fail exactly as they predicted, and were now being accused of dishonesty by the man who had forced it on them. Manteuffel is not defending his own record in that room. He is defending every officer who had been telling the truth for years and was being blamed for the consequences of being ignored. Hitler does not have a good answer. After the war, Hasso von Manteuffel was elected to the Bundestag and became the defense policy spokesman for the Free Democratic Party. He helped coin the name for the new West German armed forces, the Bundeswehr, the word that tried to separate the institution from what it had served. His post-war record carries one thing darker. In 1959, he was convicted of having a deserter shot in 1944 and served 18 months in prison. And the portrait of a professional who refused to be bullied by Hitler's tirades stands alongside that fact, not instead of it. He carried out orders that cost men their lives for failing to obey. The two things do not cancel each other. They coexist the way many things coexist in the record of that war. In 1968, he is 71 years old. He stands in a lecture hall at the United States Military Academy at West Point, speaking fluent English, teaching American officers and cadets how to conduct combat operations in deep snow. He knows this subject. He learned it in Belgium in December 1944, in a battle that consumed his army and ended Germany's last offensive in the West. The lessons come from watching his armor bogged down on the Ardennes roads, watching his fuel run out, and watching the timetable Hitler imposed dissolve in frozen mud and blown bridges. The man who ordered Bastogne bombed is teaching the army that relieved it how to fight in the conditions that finished him. There is a room somewhere in the winter of 1945. A German field marshal, tall and erect and deeply lined, sits across from an Allied officer asking questions. The officer asks which American commander impressed him most. Von Rundstedt has seen what there is to see. An adversary who had written in his diary, 3 weeks before the German attack, that an attack was coming and whom nobody had listened to, who had built 3 contingency plans before anyone asked, who had stood in a cold room at Verdun and promised the impossible, then delivered something more extraordinary, An entire army turning 90 degrees in the worst winter in a generation, 133,000 vehicles grinding north through ice and blown bridges, 7 days of fighting through the frozen Ardennes that cracked the offensive's southern flank open and ended the siege that Manteuffel had already conceded on Christmas Eve. Patton was your best, von Rundstedt says. It is not a compliment, it is a verdict, and the men most qualified to render it had watched it happen from inside the catastrophe it caused.